Welcome to Women Winning Divorce. I am your host, Heather Quick. I am an attorney, entrepreneur, author, and founder of Florida Women's Law Group, the only divorce firm for women by women. I love thinking big, thinking outside the box, creating creative solutions for women, and empowering women to win in all aspects of their life. Our approach at Florida Women's Law Group is to provide women with a strategy to not only achieve their objectives, but win at life. I believe that what may show up as adversity is simply an opportunity to change and improve your life. In each episode, I sit down with innovative professionals and leaders who are focused on how you can be your best self before, during, and after divorce. In these conversations, we are looking at how women can win at life. I have the unique opportunity to meet women when they are at a transition period of life. But that is only the beginning to becoming your best self and winning at life on your terms. With our guests, we enjoy the opportunity to explore ways all women can win and enhance their life, no matter where they are in their journey. Because divorce is just a point in life, not the end and not what defines you, rather a catalyst for your growth. Welcome to today's episode of Women Winning Divorce. I'm Heather Quick, owner and attorney of Florida Women's Law Group. Today, I am being joined by Jennifer Lee, founder of Modern Wealth, a financial firm in Sarasota, Florida. She brings almost 30 years of expertise and enjoys facilitating her clients through challenges as they experience life's upsets, such as divorce, the loss of a spouse, or business to retirement transition. Jennifer, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me, Heather. I'm thrilled to be here.
Well, it is so great to have you because, you really can't talk about divorce without talking about money. And it is an important discussion because it really affects what goes on. That's for sure.
I think it's a critical component. Certainly, you can't talk about divorce without attorneys almost 95% of the time. And then in comes the partnership with the financial aspects of it.
So I introduced you. You bring so much expertise, and you've got, your own firm and this Modern Wealth. Could you just share a little bit with me and our listeners, kind of about how you got where you are now and why you do what you do?
Sure. Well, I've been in the industry for quite a long time, and I have a comfort level with money that not everybody does. My favorite sound as a kid was a cash register, and I remember selling candy bars on the back of a school bus as a kid. So entrepreneur from long ago, and from the very beginning. So what I love about what I do is it's a natural space for me. And my particular clientele ends up being what I consider the non-moneyed party. And that is oftentimes we refer to them as the ostrich, when we talk about finance and we talk about cash flow and we talk about the future and all the little buzzwords that give them discomfort in their stomach. That's a comfort level for me. So I relocated to Florida about 12 years ago, and I had to really look at my clients and who I loved working with and who I wanted to focus on. And it really comes down to women in financial transition. Of course, we don't discriminate. Happily married couples are welcome as well. But 9 times out of 10, who needs us the most are those people who are going through these big, not only financial, but emotional upheavals, which happen to be divorce or losing a spouse.
Right. And, it's so true because often, and I've had this discussion with other women before, they thought where it's like, wow, in a lot of ways, the things that maybe when we're talking about with, getting ready for divorce, preparing, the things you need to know, you really just need to know, because if your spouse dies, you just don't know. And that can leave you in such a state that likely they would not have wanted you to be in, even if it's not your comfort zone. Like you said, you prefer to put your head in the sand and you don't really want to know or learn, but yet, it's so important.
Well, and that's the challenge. You need to have, you need to have your trusted advisors, right? You need to have the trusted people who you can count on. I have a client who I've had for, going on 15 years or so. And she's absolutely the non-moneyed spouse. And my client was her husband. And we were replacing some life insurance for him because he was a smoker and became a non-smoker. And I said, hey, we're ready. You know, I've got your policies. You just have to sign two things. One says I gave it to you. Second says your health hasn't changed. And he said, I can't sign it. I have a pulmonary embolism and I have lung cancer. And so that was the first statement. And then the second thing he said to me is, can you take care of my wife? Right? Well, I need to meet your wife, right?
Yeah.
So it really is a matter of, having an integrated involvement. And look, I understand we don't all have the aptitude for money and finance, and maybe, the cash register isn't going to be your favorite sound. That's okay. But you need to know enough to be able to make decisions for your family, be able to make constructive decisions for your kids and for your spouse and for yourself and your life moving forward. So we try to educate and get a level of comfort with our clients.
Well, and that's so great, because it's just one of the biggest things that one can lead to divorce, right? Like financial differences, but it's just that financial literacy, like just an understanding, so that, once you become empowered with knowing some things, it's not as scary, but it seems like so unknown. Because it's a different language and you're not familiar with it, similar to legal jargon and all that. If the lawyers won't, aren't willing to explain, this is what it means and this is how it's going to affect you, it just can seem so overwhelming and scary.
For sure.
So talking about divorce and, of course, complex assets, let's start with what financial expert do I need? Right? We start with a divorce, and, we represent women only. And so we'll say, for this example, she really doesn't know what there is, but she's like, but I think we're doing pretty well, right? He works hard. We got a lot, where can you share with me and our listeners, should we go to first as far as an expert?
Well, it's, I guess it's, if somebody comes to me first, if they come to the financial person first, I also make sure they're going to an attorney.
Got it.
So, it might be the same where you're talking to them, but you also need to understand the money part. So it really is together, because they both kind of, you need both in line and in order. But I think that when people are contemplating making such a big change in their life, they really need to understand the economics of it and what that's going to look like.
Right.
Because you're going from whatever the income is coming into the family unit, it's now going to be split into two households. So it's definitely going to be less. And maybe there's plenty of money to go around. That's all wonderful. Most times there are some adjustments that need to be made, and some hard decisions and some hard thinking. So, when people come to me, depending on where they are in the process, oftentimes they've already spoken with an attorney and they're trying to get their ducks in a row, and they're nervous about filling out the marital balance sheet. It's overwhelming. And, the documentation requirements is just a foreign entity to them. So I'll ask them to collect their data. I call this financial triage, right? Like, we're just going to triage your situation right now. We're not going to talk about how we're going to manage your money and asset allocate it and what income you're going to have and all those details. We're not going to get into the weeds of that. We just need to triage right now and see, what do you guys have? And then we got to talk about, what do you want, right? If you want the home, does that make sense? And can I talk you through that? Is that really, you're going to be cash poor? Do you want to be in that house? Does that make sense for you? Is that too emotional to be stuck in the marital home that was your 30-year home? Or is that where you need to be, right? So there's an emotional part to all of this. And then we get through the triage part, and you kind of put all your pieces and parts into the right categories, and understand what your potential alimony, child support from your attorney could be, what the outcome could be. And then we got to start planning your life and your cash flow moving forward. That's phase 2.
Right. There's a lot in phase 1, but you got to get through it and got to have an understanding, for sure. And that's what you, as a wealth manager, that's what you do, right? That's a lot of it.
Yes.
And okay, so for listeners,
Let's talk about the differences between a forensic accountant, because sometimes even our clients come to us and say, that's what I need. And it's just different and for a different purpose.
Oh, for sure. I mean, it's a completely different industry and a very specialized arena where you might need a forensic accountant is if you have a very contentious divorce and a spouse who's, not sharing anything, right? And I would imagine that your attorney is leading that direction and, hey, we need to bring on this party because I can't really determine what you actually have because he's being so covert, right?
Right.
And you might need to track things. I mean, we have clients that are going through horrific divorces and they think, oh, my spouse quit his job or moved money before we started the divorce process. I know there's more assets. And so you really do need somebody to dig into that. And that can be ugly.
It can. And I'm sure and often I'm sure you can just in your assessment and initial, kind of, what is there, you can probably see when things like, hey, there may be a little bit more to this that you are going to need that type of analysis as well, I'm sure.
Yeah, sometimes there are sketchy, questionable distributions from accounts. Sometimes it gets more complicated when you have closely held businesses and even family owned businesses. There's all kinds of crazy things that can be maneuvered, and it's unattractive, at least.
Well, and it is, and many times, there are a lot of things that you can legally do with money in the business, but you got to really get in there and understand that, because as the non-moneyed spouse, or if you're not understanding as much about the business, you could end up really getting shortchanged if you don't have the right people doing that for you.
No question whatsoever. Unfortunately, a lot of times the non-money party, male or female, I mean, I know we're focusing on women today, and most times it is, the non-moneyed party can really, they oftentimes they give up also in the process, right? It could be very, relatively straightforward, but the emotional strain of it is too much, and they quit too soon. And so, I think it's critical to have, you have your financial advocate, your attorney who outlines, here's the process, here's what we're expecting. You don't need to panic yet. We don't have these items back. It's going to be another couple of months, or because the emotions just start spinning. And I think,
well, they do, yeah, and fear being one of those big ones, and thinking, well, he already offered me this, so you know what, I just would be rather have this than upset him, and fight a little bit more just for what you're entitled to, right?
well, and that's the thing. I can't, and I'm sure that you have experienced this, Heather, when you meet new people and you tell them what you do, and they're like, wow. They probably say, where were you when I needed you?
Yes. Oh, I have heard that.
I mean,
more
that's
than once.
a resounding response. Like, if you could just say, if we could just interview 100 people who got divorced, and they say, what was the one thing? Oh, they know exactly what it was that they gave up too fast on, right? And that's really what we're here to do, is we're here to advocate for them and help hold them to task until they get through. So it's a little less painful, maybe.
Yeah, and exactly what you said, we've seen happen so many times, and which was really a big part of why, where they just quit too soon. But they're so close, right? It's like you're almost at the top of that mountain, but it feels like you're not. And to just give them that strength and push, when it's appropriate. Sometimes it's like, no, you're good. But when it's like, if you can just hang on in there, and then you can make better decisions when you are educated and you have a full picture. And then you can decide, not that, oh, well, that's his best offer, so I better take it.
For sure.
Well, let me ask you this, because the title of the show is Dividing Complex Assets. So what, if you could share with me and our listeners, what is meant when referring to complex assets?
Right. So let me first say what simple assets are, right?
Oh,
Simple
good way.
assets,
Good job.
just to get these out of the way, because they might not be simple assets in the minds of our listeners, but simple assets are, your cash, things in your personal account, your regular investment accounts, IRAs, pension plans, real estate. Those are the things that may seem overwhelming for the listener to divide and separate, but those are things that we can pretty easily facilitate those movements. There's different things we need to do, but it can be done relatively easy. When you're talking about complex assets, it could be closely held businesses. That's a potential red hot mess to try to figure out what the value of that is. Who works in that business? Do you both work in it? Was it an inherited business? Do you, there's a lot of moving parts in owning a business, even if you're very transparent.
Yes.
And then if you're not, then, you can maneuver things around. You can maneuver your income, you can maneuver, you can maneuver your profits. You can do a lot of things that can be questionable. So that's kind of the biggest, I think, complex asset.
And it really, there's we can do, an episode just on the finances of a closely held business, because it can look like so many different ways, and the value, and then, does the business have value that you are owed, right, as an asset, or, which I know you have seen often, just like I have, it just produces a lot of income. So it's an income stream to you versus, if we sold it and like that there's a buyout from it. So that's part of what makes it complex, because you really got to get in there and figure that out. And, how is it titled in the stock, and really what your rights are for that. But, all right, so that's a good spot for our first break. And we are going to be right back. And our listeners, what I'd ask is, if you are enjoying this show, please leave us a 5-star review. And we'd love to hear from you as far as which episode has been most helpful to you so far. We are back from our break. And again, today I'm joined by Jennifer Lee. And in the last segment, we really just talked about kind of identifying what equals simple assets versus complex, and how they look differently. And something that we didn't get to in the last segment that I want to follow up on is, okay, so you filed for divorce now, you're in the process, and you have some complicated things to divide, right? You're listening to this and you're like, yeah, we got a business, and we have some of the other simple things, which like Jennifer said, may seem overwhelming, but in the grand scheme of things, but you have a lot. Do you go to your, how many people, which I would bet you can answer this, feel as though, well, that's his financial planner. And I don't know, they play golf together, or whatever. Like, do I go to them for my information? How do I begin to figure this out, and who can I talk to?
I think that's an excellent question, right? So initially, if you need to get copies of documents, I think you can go to the family financial person and say, hey, I need copies of these documents. Recently, I've been working with a young lady who is going through divorce, and all the accounts are in his name. So she can't get access to them other than through the financial disclosures and through her attorney. So, first, you need to be aware of your assets in your household, and I hope that you are. And unfortunately today you've got everything is electronically delivered, so if you don't have that password, you may not have access to that. So that is a challenge. But first you need to gather the data, right? Whether you're picking up statements from home or you're getting them from the financial person. And then as far as evaluating these complex assets and looking into what your potential cash flow can be, I would think that's a discussion with somebody like myself, another advisor who is yours, okay?
Right.
To talk about what it is that you potentially could have from that. So we may have a client who comes in and says, well, but he's the financial person, or he's the attorney, or he's this professional. And yes, I've helped him build the business and worked it through our young children and help support and all those things. It's his. Well, yeah, it's his, but you contributed to that. It's a marital asset. And so we got to get past the psychological part that it's his, not yours.
Right.
And talk with with the attorney about what the expectation is for, whether it be alimony or for, a share of that business if you too are licensed and able to operate in that business. If it's a service business, it's not likely they're going to sell it, right?
Right.
And
it may not make sense, right? Because then you got to look at that, like, right, what's the whole picture and what makes sense?
And one of the things that, and I don't know if you mentioned this with you or talk with your clients about this, Heather, but this is one of the things that I think sometimes gets missed. So you're going through this whole divorce process, and you figure out you're splitting assets, and you're going to get so much alimony and child support and things. It's coming. You're aware, right? Well, my contention as an advisor is, well, what if he dies? Do we have, it stops.
Right.
Well, that's a problem. I'm 52 years old, and the income that I'm going to get for the next 15 years is gone. Now what? So I like to build in life insurance as a backup plan, right? So if I'm entitled to $100,000 of income for the next 15 years, you got a $1.5 million life insurance policy, and I'm fine, right? So.
And that's a really important thing, because, and we can get that ordered very often in the divorce. And sometimes it's better, if you can become the owner, then, because, you're going to find out it's no longer valid when it's a bit too late, usually. And, right. And those are ways to protect that income, for the future. So, and I think that is so important, really looking and having those discussions, because, now, you're relying on the alimony, and the assets have already been divided. So now, without that, if something happens to him, you're going to really financially struggle.
For sure. And there are things that you can do. I did have a client, I started to work with his new wife and him, and they needed to replace a life insurance policy for the former spouse who had this criteria. And every year, about 2 weeks before the policy renewed, she would call me and ask me to verify that it was still in force and paid. But she was the irrevocable beneficiary, right, of the policy. So he paid it. It was part of the agreement that he paid, but she was, he couldn't revoke her as the beneficiary. So.
And that was smart of her to always check, it's wise. You have to do that, in a lot of ways. But now, so what about, when we're talking about the different assets and ways that you can really certainly help your clients when, we're talking about, say, intellectual property that a business may own, or a service-based business like a law firm or a financial firm, and it's not like a dentist, doctor's office. It's not a physical thing like a retail store or a restaurant or a franchise type thing. How do you help your clients when that, is one of the assets?
Well, that's a challenge, right? So, it boils down to a variety of things. Who really works the business, who has the relationships. Sometimes it's a married couple and one is the salesperson and one is the facilitator. I've got a client that broke apart, and they were able to still operate their heating and air conditioning business. But that's a big ask, right? To see the person every day. I mean, that's tough, right? That's unusual. I don't see that happens all that often. And the question also is, can one party operate the business without the other? And if so, can the person who's going to retain the business pay out the soon to be former spouse, right? They might not be able to. So it's not only a logistical nightmare, it can be a financial challenge as well. A franchise might be a little bit easier, you might be able to sell that and somebody can go buy a new one or move on and do something else. But when you have a service business and you've developed relationships and you have built up a clientele, it's usually dependent on you as the person, right?
Right.
Kind of hard to
Right.
extricate that person.
It is. Yeah. And it is, it just becomes, there's just a lot of questions that need to be answered, and how do we value it? And then how are you going to get that out of it? And what's that then going to make, your financial future look like, for sure. Now, how are dividing monetary assets like retirement accounts different from things like, homes or land, cars, boats?
Sure. Well, as you well know, you got this marital balance sheet that comes to our mutual clients, and they get a little bit shell shocked and overwhelmed. They have to put all this stuff into a spreadsheet. So that doesn't overwhelm me. Like I said, money, I'm comfortable with it. So, we look at things like cash. Okay, simple. Here's $200,000 cash. You each get 100, right? You look at retirement accounts and maybe they're uneven. So if we are doing a completely equitable split, now it's a point of, things like cash are easy, or personal investment accounts are easy to divide. Things like retirement accounts or pension plans are a little bit more complex in that they need to be in part of the divorce decree and a quadro, or a qualified domestic relations order. So this is something that the divorce attorney, order at the end of the process and have a judge sign off on. That document is what I use as an advisor to then go to the investment company and say, okay, Mr. and Mrs. Smith are divorced. Here's the quadro. I need to move X number of dollar of assets into her account from his account. That is the only way to move IRA assets. You need that document. So, and that's if you want to just split everything straight down the middle. If one party decides they want, the antique cars, and the other party would rather have more cash, that's okay. Like, we just split the assets in different ways. Can be a negotiating point. I have a client who says this is one of those complex assets. Her soon-to-be husband has several $1 million in tax credits, and she's like, oh, those are his. No. We are using that as a leverage for something you might want.
Yes, absolutely.
He's in a higher tax bracket. That's all well and good, but we still want him. And so we negotiate from there. So I think it's most of the time it's the mental mindset, because all this stuff is so overwhelming,
right,
to the client. And a lot of times you and I are financial legal therapists in addition to doing the actual tasks of our job.
Absolutely. And I want to touch on, because we all do the spreadsheet, or we do, but not all assets are equal when we're dividing them. And I'm sure you have to educate your clients as well, because it's like, all right, well, yes, there's the X amount of dollars in the 401k, but that's not equal to the house value or the money market account, right? Why don't you explain that? Because I know you will do it more eloquently to our listeners, just to help them begin to understand, especially if they don't, right? Because it's not like you can just put 200 in an IRA and 200 in the bank. They're not equal.
That's true. And on paper, it looks like they're just a number, and I'll take this one and you take that one. But you have to consider what your tax situation is, right? So, when there are benefits to having an appreciated asset of your home and having two parties on it, right? So it may be valuable to sell a home while you're both still on the title, because there's a $500,000 gain, you're each entitled to $250,000 of a tax-free capital gain. So if you were to keep the house and sell it a year later, you're going to end up paying tax on $250,000. It just doesn't make any sense, logistically, and that's what I call leaving money on the table, and that makes me crazy. We don't want to make those bad mistakes, those silly mistakes. The other thing is when you referenced, your money market account versus your 401k. Well, there's different kinds of accounts inside your 401k. There are ones that you got a tax deduction when putting money in. So ultimately, at some point, you pay tax when you take it out. And then there are also Roth IRAs, Roth 401ks. And so that money grows tax-free forever. So if you can get that juicy asset, I would take that one. And sometimes it's a matter of, how astute the other party is.
Right. And when they are, for our listeners, that's where a seemingly deal on paper might not be quite what it appears if they're more savvy with understanding the tax implications, and you're thinking, well, if you take this money out, you may have penalties and taxes versus other money that's not. And, again, not knowing, you can naively accept something that then really wasn't as equal as you thought, which I know makes us both crazy. So, well, we are going to take one more break and we will be right back. And listeners, if this is your favorite part of the week, please subscribe. Then you'll never miss an episode. And we always ask that you leave us a 5-star review if you are enjoying the show. And we will be right back. Well, we are back from our last break. And again, today I'm joined by Jennifer Lee. And we discussed in the last segment, a lot of ways to navigate the division of assets and why they're different, right? Because you're going to be listening and you may not even know what they are, but what's important to know is they are different, and some split easier. And there's sometimes hidden things like Jennifer mentioned, tax credits and, depreciation, appreciation, a lot of things that really will make a difference down the road if you are advised properly before there's the big split, right, Jennifer?
Absolutely. As you were just recapping the last segment, I was thinking about when clients have real estate investment properties, that can be daunting as well. I had a client not that long ago that she and her husband had multiple properties, and he was like, I'll take these two and you take the rest. And I'm like, wait a minute, let's really look at, he's taking the ski chalet resort property that he can rent with no problem, and you've got the rundown 3-unit property that you don't have a handyman. So we really need to think through those things and make careful decisions.
Absolutely. And, as too, for our listeners, that's why once you've met with someone like Jennifer, with a financial planner, and your attorney, the more assets that you have in the variedness, like lots of properties. We've had clients sometimes, they have like 30 rental properties. You got to bring the CPA in. And sometimes, depending on the relationship, obviously it's been, the CPA with both of you. And hopefully, they ought to still talk to you and help you understand, or at least your other professionals, your financial advisor and or your attorney, understand the tax implications of all of them, because it can be really different without, making this too complex in here. It's just enough to understand, there's a lot of things you may not know that may make what appears to be, oh, that's so generous. Well, that should be your first red flag. Right, Jennifer, be like, okay, then that's not to be so cynical. However, just trust but verify, right?
Yeah. Well, you're dealing with this on a daily basis, so you see more and more situations that are of less attractive people on their worst day.
Yes.
And making unkind moves. There's you always, you trust but verify, but you hope for the best and you prepare for the worst, right? You hope that, hey, this was a relationship I had. This was my great love at one point. We just don't get along together. We just have to not live together. Hopefully, if you have kids, you can be relatively civil. And now it's a matter of practically facilitating out of the relationship, uncoupling. That's the
Yes.
popular term, right?
Very much so. Now, you've spoken before on the concept of building a machine or saving for retirement. But, when you get divorced, suddenly your machine may have available, has to be divided, right? Are there certain things you can do or certain accounts that protect your retirement savings from being considered an asset division?
Sure. Well, the only things that you can really exclude, and you correct me if I'm wrong, because I'm tiptoeing into your territory. Most things are marital assets. If you have an inheritance and you kept it completely separate, which I absolutely advocate for, if you receive an inheritance, open up a brand new account, and that is where the money goes. If you receive an inheritance of a property, I have a colleague who just told me that she inherited a property from her father. I said, fine, open up a new bank account. When you sell that house, it can go into that account. If you want to leave it to your husband, fine, but you need to retain control over that, and it's outside of the marriage. I did have one client who inherited a nice amount of money from her parents, and you also talk about the money story, right? You're having what is your money story? Is your money story so radically different from your spouse? And I'll just give you an example. This couple, her money story was her mom was a teacher, her dad was a doctor. They made decent living. They saved. She was able to ride a horse as a kid, and had a good life. So they left her a chunk of money when they passed on. Her husband, anytime money came into the household, they had a big dinner, or they spent it, or something was purchased and it went out the door. And so when she inherited the money, he wanted to spend it. He wanted to pay off the house, buy a new truck, do things, renovate the kitchen. And I had to pull her aside and say, okay, look, you need to understand, this is your money. What do you want it to do? Right? This is your machine, in our example, that can generate X number of dollars every year to take your family on a vacation that you couldn't otherwise afford, that can put your kids in private school, that can pay for your horse if that's what you want. So that's one asset. If you're thoughtful about it and don't commingle, you can keep separate. Otherwise, it is what it is. You were married, you accumulated assets. They have a part, you have a part.
Absolutely. Now, we talked a little bit about alimony and really making sure, or, talking about looking at, hey, is there life insurance, right? Because if something happens, and similar with many pensions or depending, like government retirement, there might be an option for that survivor benefit, which can be very important because you could really be out of luck on some things, the way it's supposed to be split, if you don't get, because it might not be a full account, right? With a few $100,000 in it, it's going to be a payout.
Yes.
And in that asset that you worked hard, that you fought for to receive, if there's nothing there, again, those are the kind of things that, we can't fix when it's already happened. So that's where that education and being advised. And I think particularly, Jennifer, because like you said, you're helping clients looking at what's there, but then what do they want? What is their future goals? Because that's what it's all about, right? If you're going to really plan and knowing what's there and what do you want in your future.
You're absolutely right. And that boils down to those assets that you take. So if you take the house, you don't have any cash to facilitate your current needs. If you take all the IRA assets, well, that might be 15 years from now that you're going to use them, and there's tax situations. If you take the rental properties, that might be a hassle factor. You really weren't, there's a lot of, pros and cons to each thing. And money, all that money is a tool. All these
Right.
things are a tool, and it's a matter of how well do you wield that tool, right? How
Yes.
efficient are you with it? And hey, you may end up getting investment properties is the worst thing you ever decided to do because it's just not your skill set. Or you may be in real estate and know that you can make more money in that because you have a unique skill set. I don't know. So that's why, you know, yes, we talk about, ultimately how to manage your assets and generate cash flow to replace your income. And I'll go back to the machine thing for just a second. But we need to understand the psychology of you and what your life's going to look like to understand which resources are going to be most powerful for you. Right?
And I think that is so important, Jennifer, because, as you're talking about all of these things, and that's why for our listeners, it's so important to have the financial advisor and your wealth manager, because we, as your attorney, like, we're going to talk about your goals and what you want to achieve. But as much as you like us and as much as we like you, when the divorce is over, and I mean, I've had clients that I represented like 20 years ago, and I mean, when you run into each other, but it's not an ongoing relationship, nor really should it be with your divorce attorney. Hopefully some contentious cases, it does seem like a long, lifelong relationship, but that's where that wealth manager, like, because then, Jennifer, as things change, right? Because this is a big transition, the divorce. And gosh, they're going to look really differently at a lot of things in another 3 years. Like, and they may now really have different plans.
Well, and I'll say some people say what they mean and mean what they say, and other people you have to watch what they do.
Right.
Okay. And so sometimes they're like, I want this. Well, is that your final answer? Are you sure that like, let's really play this out? Okay, so it's 5 years from now. This is what you have. This is what your life looks like. Well, no, I don't want that. Okay, so let's play this scenario another way and let's talk through this because it's a big decision. First of all, you got to the point where you're going to get divorced, but now we're really talking about what does your life look moving forward, and we got to plan out not just 2 years from now, but we don't want you to run out of money.
Right, absolutely, and really want to make the right decisions that support that future, that 5 years, 10 years down the road. And you have a relationship so that as things evolve, you're making those decisions with the money that help as well.
For sure.
But okay, so we're talking about the future. And this is something that I believe very strongly in, but let's talk about prenups to protect your assets. Because we just went through this divorce and you and I have both been there aside of him the whole time. And then what happens in 2 years when you're so in love? And now what, right? Like, I mean, there's just so much exposure there. And tell me, do you deal with that often? Do you have those discussions?
We do have those of course, that's, a very, you need to tread lightly in that area. You need to address it, but you need to tread lightly because it can be very sensitive. Again, hope for the best, prepare for the worst. I hope that the relationships, you're getting married, one party maybe has significantly more assets than the other. The idea would be, hey, I think we're going to be together forever. But if not, but see, I look at it like, you would want to take care of the spouse who you're marrying today, right? So what are you willing to make sure happens? If it only lasts 2 years, if it lasts 5, not so much, hey, you've got $500 million. How do we keep it from your new spouse? More so, okay, let's build in parameters to protect your new spouse so that if God forbid, because, the person with $500 million has kids and has charities and other things that have developed and grown prior to the marriage.
Well, right. And I think though that it's, or also, I mean, Jennifer, I'm looking at it from perspective of, okay, you as who was the non-moneyed spouse, okay, now you've got, you've done your plan, you've got this, and there's a relationship, but let's protect what you have for maybe your children and for you, to make sure that you're not exposed, if whether they have money or not, right? Or just that advice, like, all right, don't just because they said, well, now we're married, put my name on the house. Like,
Yeah.
you don't have to do that.
For sure. You don't have to do that. And I think that people who have been divorced prior are a little bit more self-aware about their assets and protecting them. Lots of times I have second marriage, even third marriage, and they're bringing their assets to the marriage, and maybe they're buying a house together. That's the marital asset. The rest of it is their own. Their kids are on their IRAs. Those assets are separate. And I think that that's reasonable.
Absolutely. And I'm going to say one more thing. I can't believe that we are almost out of time. I really can't, because I found this conversation so very interesting. But I do want to say, because as you mentioned, maybe their kids are on the IRAs. Let's talk about beneficiaries. Okay. You've gotten divorced. Now you've got these things, right? You got to be smart and think about that, so that, your children or whoever it is that you would want to receive this in the event anything happened, it's taken care of.
Yeah, I'm sure that you see it a lot. I see it on my end because people will fail to change it. I've had a client for a long time, and she's remarried, and her husband's been a client for a long time, and her first spouse just passed away. Well, they have 2 children together, and she's the beneficiary on the IRA. Well, she's going to give it to her kids, but her tax bracket is high. That created an unnecessary waste of tax dollars, where the kids could have had, 10 years to distribute the money at their tax rate, and all different kinds of planning opportunities. But, I'm sure that you hear your clients talk about it all the time. You've got to review your 401k plan beneficiaries. Maybe your old job 401k is still hanging out there. You should be rolling that over and managing it. IRAs, your bank account. Oh, this one makes me crazy and concerned. For when somebody passes away, make sure your bank account has, a transfer on death or an owner, because guess what? If you do all this estate planning work and you fail to change these beneficiaries, you just wasted your money.
Exactly.
Because it still doesn't happen.
And then they got to go to court. It's just such a mess. So it's also, in addition, because, as your attorney, as your wealth advisor and wealth manager, we can tell you these things, but you got to listen and you got to take action, because, we want you to keep everything that you're supposed to keep after you've gone through this divorce and, understood it all. And then it goes to the people that it's supposed to afterwards. Right.
That's right.
Well, Jennifer, thank you so much. But before we go, I would ask if you can import on our listeners what you've learned about advocating for and empowering women throughout your career.
But we talked a little bit about this pre-call. The number of times I have run into, talk to women after a talk where they've reached out to me and they've said, where were you when I needed you? Right. So I think, the most important part is getting your ducks in a row, understanding what your resources are, finding that financial advocate, having somebody who's on your team. And of course, we didn't talk about it, but it doesn't hurt to have a therapist involved in the process too.
Oh, always, yes.
Because sometimes the emotional support component is very, very critical. But women are resilient and bright and more than capable, and we just need to give them all the information and the tools they need to be successful.
Absolutely. Well, we've reached the end of our show, and Jennifer, thank you so much for being our guest this week. It's been great information, a great conversation. And for our listeners, you can find her at modern-wealth.com. And of course, her information will be linked below in the show notes. Thank you, Jennifer.
Thank you, Heather.
All right. Well, for our listeners, if you or someone you know is going through divorce and is thinking about a divorce, of course, reach out to us at FloridaWomen'sLawGroup.com or also join our Facebook group, Women Winning Divorce. The link will be below in the episode description. And also, we are hiring. So please check out our openings on the Florida Women's Law Group website career section. And again, thank you for listening. If you enjoyed the show, we would greatly appreciate a 5-star review.
Thank you for joining me for this episode of Women Winning Divorce. My goal is to elevate your life and the way you are thinking so that you are best equipped to win at life. If you enjoy the show, please subscribe so you automatically get my new shows every week. And I would love to hear from you personally. Come join the conversation on social and join our Facebook group, Women Winning Divorce. We welcome your comments and suggestions. We want to bring you content that helps move your life forward. Women Winning Divorce is the place for an elevated conversation on how women can thrive during times of adversity in order to live their best life.
O'Reilly Auto Parts provides more than just the right parts for your repair. Our professional parts people can also offer free check engine light diagnosis. We can scan your vehicle and provide a list of possible fixes. Find the right parts for you or recommend a great local repair shop. Don't ignore your check engine light. Stop by your local O'Reilly Auto Parts.
O'Reilly.